Today we're going to be looking at an engineering change process in SOLIDWORKS PDM, but we're going to enhance it a little bit with our new Equivaq add-ins and web applications. For those of you that I have not worked with, my name is Braxton Kirsting. I am the application expert in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been with MLC for almost 8 years now and SOLIDWORKS user for over 13 now. And I primarily focus on our data management solutions, so SOLIDWORKS PDM, SOLIDWORKS Manage, and I also develop our custom add-ins and applications. As I mentioned, we're going to be reviewing an engineering change process today. And an engineering change process isn't really unique. Most people have some sort of process. They might have a three-pronged approach where you have an ECR, an engineering change request, followed by an order and a notice, or you might not refer to any of those in specificity, but you likely have some aspect of this process, right? We typically have some sort of request. Where that comes from might be a redline PDF, or email. You might even have some sort of web form application that anyone in the organization can access and strive for the best product or innovate your products and call out any potential issues with your product. Now, not every request is necessarily valid, so there should typically be some review process to determine the requested change's validity. Why are we doing it? What's the impact? Is it going to affect existing product lines? Is the juice worth the squeeze in terms of cost and viability? Ultimately, if that request is approved and the change is typically ordered or assigned to an engineer where we have to plan out the changes, what's impacted or what needs to be changed, who's going to be doing that work, and ultimately getting the files to an editable state from their release state that they might be currently at. Once that change is completed, then it comes down to distributing the notice to all the impacted departments, divisions, etc. Is it going to impact procurement, manufacturing, or maybe external vendors? Maybe no one at all, maybe your ERP system, and determining existing inventory for changed items. Now, a lot of times your change process might have a form accompanying with it. A lot of times we see this take shape in a Word or an Excel file in PDM. And this is great because we can map our custom properties to it, reasons for change, description of the change, maybe even the affected items. Now, documenting each affected item and pulling in its metadata, that's where we're going to see some of the Equivaq add-ins, the attached references add-in, kind of fill in a gap and kind of make our process a bit more robust. The traveler itself might also have its own workflow. Different departments, divisions might need to weigh in on the change itself, but not necessarily the CAD documents. And so it might have a different flow, different approver set that it needs to go through in order to complete that process. But at the same time, it can be ideal for the traveler to progress your CAD models through its workflow. Keeping that touch point to a single file makes things a little bit easier for an administrator or a manager to complete a change and stamp that final approval on the change request. Now, out of the box, some of the challenges we tend to face with this process is that the traveler and the CAD documents are kind of their own entities. We can, of course, copy paste this reference and create a link, but having a holistic view, an overview of all open change requests or change processes, and understanding employee workloads or when they're assigned and when the due dates are coming up may ultimately impact our delivery of the change itself. And so out of the box, we can rely on a PDM search and pull in that metadata, and we might even export that search and format it in Excel or some other software for visualization. But that's some overhead that it requires you to perform the search and extract it, and it's not necessarily real time. It's not something that you can just kind of pop in and check on. And so where does Equivaq and the add-ins and applications come in to help with this process? Today, we're going to be reviewing 4 distinct products. The Atlas dashboards. This is a web application that's hosted in IIS, similar to SOLIDWORKS PDM Web 2. If you are familiar with that application, you might already have the infrastructure in place for Atlas dashboards. Also, take a look at the attached references add-in, and this is how we can create a unified link between that traveler document and our CAD documents, both syncing the metadata and creating the custom references between each. Also have the PDM Auditor. It's kind of in the background process, keeping track of our user activity. So, if we are a CAD admin, we can always pop in and see what work's being done within the system, how that might relate to our change process, and is there a reason why an employee isn't, getting their files changed or updated for a particular engineering change, and help us keep tabs on that workload. And last but not least, our BOM ETL, or ETL stands for Export, Transform, Load. It's a way that we can take our BOM data in SOLIDWORKS and kick it out into SQL, a SQL table to prep it for an integration service. And that can take that metadata and kick it out to any other database system or your ERP software to document your assembly bill of materials, or as we'll see in this example, maybe a change bill of materials with part disposition. So with Atlas dashboards, we have the web app, which is accessible just in our web browser. And so we have a variety of different dashboards that we can develop and design at any time. The Atlas dashboard comes with a designer application that helps with creating the little widgets, filters, and also designing your query inside the dashboard editor. What we're looking at now is just kind of a high-level overview of the CAD documents within my SOLIDWORKS PDM vault. Up at the top here, we can filter it based on who has files checked out, or maybe we just want to see which files are currently in this ECO WIP state. As we're going through the engineering change process, this can help filter down those documents in my vault. In addition to this live data of our PDM environment, the Atlas dashboard comes with a PDM connector. And the benefit of that is we can effectively make the dashboard an interface of sorts directly into PDM. These hyperlinks can browse to the files using the native Kinesio link. So if you're familiar with PDM notifications, the hyperlinks in those notifications they match up to the method we use to show those in the dashboard. But the additional benefits of our PDM connector is that we can transition the file and check in, check out the files directly from the dashboard itself. So I want to check out this end component. I just click the checkout button, and now this file is checked out in my name. But we're not necessarily restricted to just PDM data, right? This is a dashboard connector that allows any database connection or even Excel CSV connections. If you have kind of a running log of sorts, we can directly tie into that. Here I have another dashboard. Now this one is also looking at my PDM environment, but it's instead focusing on my engineering changes. So we can get just kind of an overview of all open changes, or maybe even filter it down to specific date range when they were created. Another nice aspect of this is if there are affected items, we can bring those in and have that overview of each of these documents that are in any given change order. Any one of these grids can also be exported directly to PDF, Excel, or just an image if you want to report on it, say in a presentation, or utilize Excel to further format that data. We're going to take a look at this engineering change order here that was just created. It's currently under ECO, is ready to build that package. And we can see just by that browse click, it's going to open my File Explorer into my Vault view and select the file just the same way that we experienced from our PDM notifications. So our Atlas dashboards are a web application. They rely on a backend called DevExpress, which makes creating the widgets, creating the queries very structured. There's a lot of documentation as well if you look into DevExpress. So if you have any familiarity with creating these queries, creating the dashboards is pretty simple. And the Atlas server application will be bundled with a designer app. And depending on how many designers you have, you can split that work up into multiple users. Dashboards can be modified and created at your choosing. So if you have a new need arise, or maybe need to modify an existing, that's something that you will always be able to do. We can link up those external data sources. So if you have an ERP system that's a database backend, and we also have PDM, we can even marry those two together with a federated data source. So if we want to bring in some ERP data and see it side by side with PDM, we would have that ability directly within our dashboard. And another key differentiator here with our Atlas product is that we have PDM interactivity. We have the ability to check in, check out, and change state directly from the dashboard itself, effectively making a new potential interface for you or your users. Now, I've identified that we have an engineering change order ready to be built out. This is where I'm going to rely on our attached references add-in to make that process a little bit simpler for me. Currently, I have this file checked out to me, and I do need write access to the file. But once it's checked out, in my right-click menu, I'll have some Equivaq tools in a submenu. This attach references tool effectively makes that, if you're familiar with the copy-paste as reference workflow, makes that process a little bit simpler. It presents us with a separate dialog that we can just search and browse for any given file. In this case, I'm actually looking to add some LEDs to my ratchet, maybe make it a little bit easier to attach it to the fastener. So I'm just going to select the two items and open directly from here. And what that's doing is it's generating a custom reference with this XML file. So between our CAD files and XML, now I've created the link between my affected documents. So I'll go ahead and check this in. We can see that structure. Here's my main body, and then here's the assembly structure. And I've created a separate disposition bill of material view. I do filter this down to the top level because I don't want to see the assembly references. But I want to point out that by creating the link, or by using the attach references add-in, it has also written the engineering change value back to the affected items. Now, where I'm using this to benefit my workflow is the other parts that aren't affected by this process or by this change order. I don't want them to move forward. So I'm using this engineering change number as a condition to prevent movement inadvertently from other files within the same assembly structure. So just to demonstrate this, we can see that engineering change number can't be blank, has to have some value in order to be left out of the release state. So now we're having that gated entry and exit from our release state that's hinging on whether or not the engineering change itself is approved or is allowed to go forward into a change order. Now, in addition to feeding the traveler data back to the affected items, we're also going the other way. We're utilizing an XML file that has a style sheet, and where this really shines is on the preview tab. This preview tab is now pulling in the metadata, and more importantly, it's pulling in the affected items along with the affected items metadata. So we can see here, disposition not filled out. We maybe need to fill in a couple more values here. I'm going to go ahead and send this forward to the ECO state. I've built my package. It's ready to actually make the changes. And this transition is where we're going to see these parts come out of the release state so that I do have the ability to check them out and make changes. So now we've transitioned both the XML through its own workflow, and the impacted files are also in a CAD workflow separate from the traveler document, but they've also transitioned with that traveler. And we do that with matching the transition names. So it's a nice little trick that we can marry two different workflows or maybe even two different states and route them through the same transition. Now, I might have some other supporting documents that I also want to attach to my change order here. One of the other functionalities of the attach references add-in is the ability to track down child references. And the way it does this is through comments. Check in your document. If you comment with the name of your engineering change, this find references will scan those comments from the last 3 versions, and it will create a reference to those files. So this PDF was checked in with a comment and it was related to our 00145 change, and now that has been added to my affected documents. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll fill out the disposition for these 2 parts. So now that they're in the ECO WIP state, I can now check them out. And actually from the engineering change order, I can even update the disposition directly from the bill of material. So I'll just key in the changes we're making here. We're going to go ahead and rework the assembly, and we'll just scrap the remaining inventory of our main body. For the red line, I'm not so concerned about disposition. I'm just creating the link, and this lets me navigate easier. So, and likely, you know, this is where changes to the geometry, changes to the model would take place. And ultimately, you may even have a separate review process for the CAD documents getting to a state in the workflow where they're ready to be released, ultimately from the engineering change order. And so just kind of completing that process here, when we go to a completed state, we'll see the PDF, right? It doesn't have the same workflow, and I'm not too concerned about that, but this will change the state for my CAD documents in order to update their revision to the next value, and also to export our bill of material. So this has now been released. It's complete. The CAD files are also released, and that revision has now been bumped up to revision B. So with our attached references, we make it easier for that traveler document to be utilized with creating our custom references, and also, more importantly, mapping the file properties to and from the child and parent documents. That allows unique opportunities to gate your workflows and create one touch point for people to move that engineering process forward. So we can map up to 5 different variables with the child components back to the engineering change order, and the engineering change number is what's by default mapped to the child documents. And finding children makes it easy for a lot of people to interact with the engineering change, right? It might not be the same personnel that's adding the supporting documentation, but If they know the related engineering change order, they can key that in on check-in, and you can easily track down the related information to your engineering change document using the find children command. Now, during this whole process, the PDM auditor has been running in the background. The PDM auditor is responsible for watching users' cache activity, so who is performing a get latest and on what. And this is also something that we can sync up to email. So here's an example of a cache threshold exceeded. Essentially, I said I want to be notified as the administrator if any of my users cache more than 100 files at a time. And this can alert me to maybe people that are trying to walk away with company IP, for instance, or if they're working outside their purview, you might want to be alerted to that fact. And the PDM auditor is constantly watching, and it's something that you can configure what that threshold is that they will trigger this notification. But it can keep you as an administrator informed of user activity as well, just knowing what they're actively working on. Now, this is kind of a small snapshot of what the PDM auditor will present to you. Inside the admin tool, there's also this user interface that will break down user activity based on any given day. Depending on if there's activity, you might not see anything listed here, but this gives us an easy way to filter based on a given action. If they're responsible for an engineering change order and they need to be making changes to the files, we can see any files that's been added or checked in. And this information can be exported out to CSV. It is kind of delimited with a space character here. And so to really delve into the content here, we might export it out to CSV. Then we can even use Atlas to use as a data source that CSV file. The PDM auditor as an administrator is a good way to understand what your user activity actually is, and whether or not they're actively working on the engineering change that maybe they've been assigned. It does utilize email alerts, and so you can set up email notifications fairly easily. If you've ever had to set up a relay for PDM, you don't have to for this utility. And it is storing all that metric data in a database. And so we can also view the cache recorder information from our dashboard. So here's just kind of a sample one I've set up for my users. Maybe you have users split across different geographies, and we can even bring in a choreograph here to filter our documents based on location. And then that granular user activity, that's something that we really don't get anywhere else. It's a good way to see every single action that a user's facilitated. And it even includes things like who initiated a task, who initiated your convert to PDF task. So a lot of good information in our PDM auditor that isn't directly available out of the box. And last but not least, our BOM ETL add-in has been running in the background as well. This is a task add-in, meaning we're able to configure it to our transitions as a transition action. So when a file goes into release, or maybe when an engineering change is completed, then the bill of material is exported. And you may be familiar with the out-of-the-box XML functionality where PDM will kick out an XML. What this is actually doing is it is populating a SQL table with the information. So it's structured a little bit easier to work with, and it's likely able to go back to your same SQL instance that hosts your PDM environment. So not only are we able to export the assembly BOM data that, as new releases come out, you might need to update your ERP with the new bill of material or new items in general that engineering has created. This process can make it a little bit simpler to work with the outputs from PDM. XML is easy to work with, but there isn't any direct path to get it into another database without some sort of middleware typically. And with this BOM ETL add-in, we can populate the SQL table with the data and then rely on SQL integration services through Microsoft SQL Server to transform that data into any other receiving system. And so it's a lot more structured. The environment's set up for us to use SSIS, abbreviated, to take that data and move it into another system and even apply logic to that information. But like I said, this is a task add-in. It's configurable to the bill of material setup in your PDM environment. And so not only new releases and assembly BOMs, we can even apply this to maybe a disposition bill of material for our engineering change documents. So here's an engineering change I processed the other day that has 4 items, and it even gives us a breakdown of what each part disposition is. So of course, this can also be exported. This is, as an administrator, this is a nice view just to see what is being processed through the system. Over time, how many files are we actually scrapping? How many files are we reworking? We might even have some other piece of metadata that we would be able to associate some cost with these actions. So really just ending back on Atlas dashboards, the capabilities of visualizing your data are pretty endless in terms of PDM and any external database system. So as I mentioned, it's configurable based on your bill material setup. So depending on how you have your bills of material in your PDM admin here, in my case, I have these two, whichever columns you have configured here is the data that is ultimately exported to SQL. And so this is just kind of a preview snapshot of the actual database table. And we can have multiple configurations. So different workflows, different transitions, we might want to kick out different bill of material configurations for different purposes. That being said, it is a task add-in. So if we need to execute those different configurations in a different workflow or in different transitions, we can utilize the transition actions to do so. And so utilizing SSIS or SQL integration services is a pretty standardized way of transporting the data from one SQL environment into another SQL database. And so it has clear documentation. It's not necessarily a custom developed application with compiled code. So it's a little bit different and has a little bit more support in terms of when we start talking about middleware, middle applications like that. So just a quick overview of the 4 primary add-ins I wanted to talk about here is our Atlas dashboard gives us a really good visualization of our data and can span across multiple different sources, right? We're not just looking at PDM data, and we can marry that data up together as long as we have some connection between the two systems. The other nice benefit of your Atlas dashboards is the ability to export the data to Excel or to PDF. So multiple different ways to visualize or disseminate that dashboard information. So you can control access a little bit. Our BOM ETL offers a really nice way of taking our bill of material structure and metadata and exporting it in another format that's, I think, more accessible in terms of any ERP or MRP integration project. Our attached references makes creating those connections simpler. And it also allows us to map back the affected items to the traveler document and vice versa, map the engineering change number back to the affected items. And then as a CAD admin, we can keep tabs on what users are up to within our vault structure. And if I am a manager overseeing an engineering change process, I can key into any particular user on any given day to see, what have they been working on? Are they working on what they need to? Or maybe another fire came up and it's kind of thrown off their schedule. So I can kind of make myself aware as a good manager. There are a couple other notable mentions I want to show you guys as well. There is an add-in called Hub, and Hub is a nice way to visualize your group and user membership. If you have a lot of groups, it can be kind of cumbersome to jump in and out of the groups to see the group members. And so Hub gives us a nice way to load all groups and all users in one view and control membership. We can check off membership directly from this table, or export it out and modify it in Excel and bring it back in as an XML file. So for those of you that have large numbers of groups, maybe you have project-specific groups, this is a really good way to visualize it and put people in and out of the groups in one view. And last but not least, we have another task add-in called Transition Time. And this can be helpful in the engineering change process as well. It allows us to schedule transitions or change state actions within PDM for particular workflow transitions. And so if you have large assembly sets that are being transitioned through, and you may have encountered this before, but if you are setting a lot of variables, typically you're setting revision, but you might be setting approved dates, approvers. The more variables we're writing to the files, the longer those transitions can take, to the point where it can just kind of chew up your machine for any given time. Couple that with any conversions to PDF or STEP, or it may be using your computer resources for longer than you intended. And so this is a great way to offload that, or at least delay it to maybe off hours, so that you're not actively having to sit there. It's not eating up your office hour time. And so kind of allows us to offload it so that you can use your time more efficiently. And so this could also be a good fit into any engineering change process if you are converting a lot of data, or trying to conserve licensing with task hosts. This would be a good alternative to do that. And with that, that's completed my presentation into this enhanced engineering change process. I again thank you all for joining us today. At this point in time, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A that you can go ahead and raise any questions. I'm happy to answer. So I got a question here. When you use the get function from the PDM interface, it caches the file to your computer. When you use the copy tree tool, you can write files directly outside the vault. Will the audit capability know when the copy tree function is used to write files outside the vault? Yes. When you use copy tree, it is caching the data. So if you're going to copy it, regardless of where you're copying, in the vault or out, the copy tree is going to trigger the caching behavior in PDM. Well, I will say, if any questions come to mind, sometimes I know they're not immediately there, definitely let us know. We're happy to engage with any conversation. If anything you saw today you think would enhance your PDM environment, definitely let us know. Or if you want to have a further chat, let us know as well.